Hi friends, in this lesson I'm going to show you an effective 4-step structure you can use on your IELTS write-in task 1. Learning a structure like this one is so helpful because you'll know how to organize your answer in a way that examiners like it to be. Okay, we will look at this structure in 1 second, but I want to say if you're new here, hi, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com. If you're looking for an IELTS tutor, that's the place to go. You can also find lessons from me on there as well. So this 4-step structure can work well for all of the different types of questions on write-in task 1, but it does work particularly well for describing a graph. So in today's lesson, I'll go through this structure by describing a graph, and I'll show you how to use it effectively. And the graph we're going to describe together is this one here. So this is the graph we'll describe. It's all about the oil production capacity in these 6 countries from 1990 to 2010, so in a 20-year period. So this is a bar graph, and it's a very common question type on task 1 and probably one of the easiest types of graphs to describe. So now you have to describe this graph. Remember, for IELTS write-in task 1, you have to write at least 150 words, which is kind of a lot, but if you learn this structure, you will easily write more than 150 words. So let's take a look at step 1. Step 1 is simply to write an overview. So what is the graph showing? So let's analyze this chart. We should write about the oil production capacity from these 6 countries, and it's measured in millions of barrels per day. A simple opening for this graph could go like this. The bar chart illustrates the estimated amount of oil produced in 6 countries between 1990 and 2010, measured in millions of barrels per day. So as you can see, it mentioned those 2 points very clearly: estimated amount of oil produced and measured in millions of barrels per day. I also talked about the 6 countries and between 1990 and 2010. This is a good opening because it mentions all of the key points in the bar chart and shows the examiner that you understand what the chart is all about. So step 1 is to give a general overview of all the key points in the graph and what it's generally about. You don't have to go into details right away, but you should look at all the information provided to you and then paraphrase that slightly. Let's look back at this now, and I'll show you how I paraphrased. The first paraphrase was based on oil production capacity, and I wrote the estimated amount of oil produced. Next up, we have millions of barrels per day, and I wrote measured in millions of barrels per day. So step 1 is to talk about what the graph is showing and give a general overview. That's the easiest part, of course. Now let's look at step 2, which is to talk about the trends in the graph. Okay, so the first sentence: overall oil production tended to increase during this 20-year period. Is this true? Well, yes. If you look at all of the different countries, the oil production increased during the 20-year period. So the first sentence describes an overall trend in that graph. I did not talk about a particular country, just overall what is happening. Then I mentioned Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is an interesting country in this graph because it produces the most oil, and on top of that, the increase during the period was most significant. So I wrote, the figures for Saudi Arabia were significantly higher than in the other countries. And then we looked at Qatar. Qatar is also an interesting country here because its production was the lowest. So this is how you talk about overall trends. You want to look at what is happening in the graph, and then you can narrow down to 1 or 2 really important points. In this case, it was countries, so Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Saudi Arabia because it was increasing the most, and Qatar because it was increasing the least. And notice I did not mention any numbers here, nor did I talk about all of the information in the chart. I just talked about the overall trends and the trends of the most significant countries. So step 2 is an overview of the trends. Remember that. You don't need to go into details or talk about numbers right away. Instead, leave your numbers for step 3, which I'll talk about now. Now, in step 3, you want to write about the most important details. So step 3 is where you go into detail, where you can talk about numbers and percentages. So what are the most important details in this chart? Well, again here, I would recommend you look at the 2 countries which are the most different. And they are obviously Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So now we want to go into details about these two countries. So let's look at Saudi Arabia first. I wrote, from 1990 to 2010, there was a significant increase in oil production in Saudi Arabia. In 1990, just over 8 million barrels per day were produced, and this increased rapidly, reaching a peak of just over 14 million barrels per day in 2010. So as you can see here, when I talked about Saudi Arabia, I actually mentioned numbers, how many barrels of oil they produced. And this is what you want to do in step 3. You want to go into details like this. But it's a good idea just to go into details about the important information in step 3. Usually the important information you mentioned in the trends in step 2. So for this example, it was Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So now let's take a look at Qatar. So I wrote, in contrast, the smallest producer was Qatar. Despite a slight increase in 2000, production in Qatar remained relatively steady at less than 1 million barrels per day. Again, here you can see that I went into details about the important information. Okay, that's step 3. Now let's do a quick review. So step 1, remember, was talking about what is in the graph, giving a general overview of what the graph is about. Step 2, the overall trends. So what is the change the graph is showing? You can also talk about the most important information. In this example, it was countries as well. But keep it general, just trends. You don't need to talk about numbers in step 2. And step 3 is where you go into details about the most important information. So in my opinion, those 3 steps are by far the most important. And you'll probably get about 150 words just by going through those 3 steps. But if you have time or you need to write more words, then step 4 is useful for you. So let's look at step 4 here. So step 4 is talking about extra details. So in this example, we can talk about some details from the other 4 countries, since we haven't really talked about them at all yet. Again, here you should talk about numbers and be as specific as possible. Okay, so the 4 countries are Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. The other countries saw a slight rise in oil production over the period. The estimated figure for Iran in 1990 was 3 million barrels per day, compared with around 2 million barrels in the other 3 countries. The amount of oil produced peaked in 2010 in Iran at over 4 million barrels, and at almost 4 million barrels in Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. Okay, and here is the answer in full. In total, this was 189 words, so well above the 150 words mark. So that's a simple 4-step structure. Now you want to learn vocabulary you can use for task 1. I recommend you watch this video here for that, and I'll see you there.